after a long career, I'm interviewing John Winter, the CEO of Arita, about his last 10 years or so in the role. John, I've got an interest in history, so I've looked back at A Platform for Recovery. Those who haven't seen it, there it is. An outstanding document. It covers insolvency, policy aims. It does speak to large business. It speaks to SMEs. It covers many of the things that we've seen have been achieved. Do you just want to reflect on that for us?
Yeah, so we put Platform for Recovery together not long after I joined Arita, because it struck me that while we'd worked really hard historically on being a part of policy reform, there'd never been a holistic approach to saying this is what we want to get out of reform over the longer term. And so it did start with even the principles of insolvency and what we wanted to achieve. But by creating that roadmap, we actually gave ourselves a whole series of goals that we were going to try and deliver on. We were then incredibly fortunate, and it was a happy accident of history, that only months after we released that, the federal government announced an inquiry for the Productivity Commission into what was called business setup, transfer and closure. And I saw that come up in a news release and I went, closure? Well, closure is what we do. And so we had the really good fortune of meeting Dr. Warren Mundy, who was the lead Productivity Commissioner on that. And Narelle Ferrier, our technical director, went down to Canberra and she actually trained the Productivity Commission on the basics of insolvency law. That also gave us an opportunity to talk to them about what good policy looked like. And so from our template document, we were able to get that into the zeitgeist, I guess. We were able to get that that thinking put forward for good public debate and have it reviewed by independent professionals within the Productivity Commission. And that's what ended up creating our roadmap, Joe.
In terms of the history of advocacy, and I'm a student of history, I'm interested in where it all began and how the history of advocacy's influenced you, firstly in the jobs that you've brought to this and even looking further back. I mean, what can we learn from the history of advocacy that you think's been beneficial for peak bodies like Arita?
Well, I think it really does come down to the public good issue. All too often, a lot of member associations, and there is a distinction between member associations and professional bodies, will go in with a self-interest angle. A lot of lobby groups, that's the sole reason they exist. It is about self-interest and trying to get the best for their members or the community that they represent. Ours is a bit different around that. And so we're in the fortunate position now that when we walk in and have a meeting with government, they're not thinking they're trying to get something out of me. That's just for their benefit. They look at us now as more of an independent policy house, a source of expertise. So we will get government phoning us for advice. And so that's where the good role of a balanced and independent advocate has its history, and that's its strength. You know, I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast now would have the view that a lot of people who advocate to government are there as lobbyists and self-interests, and it's a dark art, and there's not much respect for it. But the role of an advocate for good public policy is where it was originally rooted.
There's a tension between practicing the craft and trying to change the law, particularly in a high-stakes game like insolvency. If I'm a beneficiary of the game, should I be trying to change the law or just playing a role as implementing what other people put in front of me? And I guess that's one reason I think it's important to put independent people in the path of government.
Yep, and I agree with that to an extent, but without your input, without your peers' input, we don't have the expertise that we need. Now, Arita has an incredibly strong team of specialists. I already mentioned Narelle Ferrier, Kim Arnold, obviously, and Lizelle Jacobs. That's a powerful team, but they're not at the coalface in the same way that you and other professional members are.
I think we have achieved what you've said about public good versus member interest. So talk about that for a minute. So balancing the walk between I'm here to benefit the members and I'm here to benefit, but the members are here to benefit broader society. We run an insolvency, operation. Is what's in the public good in the interests of members? Not always, right?
Yep. And that's
what makes my firm better isn't necessarily in the public interest.
Correct.
So tell me about that.
It's a really heavy tension. And if you think about the heavy focus that Arita has, particularly around conduct and good ethical practice. This is one of the best examples of it. So the conduct process, we place very heavy obligations on members around things like independence and how you perform your duties. That actually doesn't give you a competitive business advantage at the most basic level. But what it does is protect the community and it protects the rest of the profession. And that's the very definition of profession. You are meant to give more to it as a professional. You are meant to have a higher public good in mind when you operate. But that doesn't mean to say you don't have to run a business efficiently and effectively, but there is no doubt attention. And so, yes, we do ask people not to go and take certain appointments because the public would start to question your professionalism at the most basic level. But by doing that, you protect yourself and the rest of the profession as well, because the public can have greater faith and confidence that you are doing the right thing, and that the trust in particular that liquidators are given at a statutory level is warranted, and your quasi-judicial role is something that you should be empowered to undertake.
There's a few quotes that are in the report that I'll read out to you, and you can comment on some of those. Australia's corporate insolvency system is overly complex, difficult to access, creates unnecessary cost and confusion for both debtors and creditors. A very large number of stakeholders and experts, meanwhile, appear to agree with the Safe Harbour Review's assessment of the system as an impenetrable quagmire. I mean, I must say, I find it a bit complex, but I don't find it that bad. Maybe I've just got Stockholm syndrome. But tell me, when you read those kind of things, what does that tell you about where corporate law reform needs to go?
It is so complex that it isn't approachable to the primary users. And Joe, you're probably sitting there going, well, I'm a primary user. The real primary user of the Corporations Act is actually directors of companies and creditors of companies. And they have no idea what's in there. They don't even understand 181 to 183, let alone around directors' responsibilities, let alone everything else. And so for them as the primary user, it is totally unapproachable. And particularly if you think about somebody who's starting a small trade-focused business, they wouldn't know what was in there, yet they should. So a radical simplification would actually allow people to be more compliant.
I would challenge that by saying it is complex, though. It's complex to wind up companies. There is a legal process. Lots of people are implicated. People need protection.
We know that about 50 to 60,000 companies a year exit the market, yet only 10,000 of them are actually complying with the law anyway.
Yes.
And so that sort of leakage suggests that there has to be a better way, rather than having companies magically struck off because they didn't pay their ASIC fee.
So my wheelhouse, Safe Harbour, when the inquiry came out in 2021, the comment I made was I very much saw it as a maturing of the sector. So giving practitioners the real ability to embrace debtors, work in boardrooms with something legitimate, something that debtors wanted to use. Do you see that happening? Do you think that there is a maturing of the sector? I mean, this reform is going to be a part of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Look, I think Safe Harbour is actually one of our proudest achievements. There'd long been, as you know, a braying for a Chapter 11 style arrangement in Australia. Anybody who wants Chapter 11 doesn't know what Chapter 11 is. It is incredibly complex, incredibly expensive, and rarely delivers great outcomes. Safe Harbour, on the other hand, allows directors to be protected, and at the same time forces them to think about where their business is. So while they've still got ownership of their business, they have to bring in somebody like you who challenges them and goes, you're not on a path to solvency here. You've not got a good strategy in place here. This is what you need to do to fix it up.
It does do that, and it is redemptive, and boards come to us and say, this has been a good process because we've learnt things about how we conduct our meetings and how we conduct a longer-term view on strategy. But small business doesn't work for small business.
No, and it was never designed as a small business tool. The reality is that safe harbour is always going to be a bit too expensive for a small business that's probably already completely broke by the time they ask for help anyway. But that's where small business restructuring was designed to fit in. So again, when we talk about, there's piecemeal and then there's mosaic.
Talk to me about the next 10 years or so for Arita. What do you think, it looks like? What does the landscape look like? If we're achieving success at Arita, what's the vision?
The effective exit of a business delivers more in productivity than the startup of a new business. If we can drive that thinking into the market so that we save more good businesses but allow an efficient exit of the others, we will deliver significant productivity savings for this country. And Arita can and should be the driver of it. But Arita's other big focus, and we've recently got approval for at a federal government level to create a graduate diploma in restructuring, insolvency and turnaround. We set the benchmark for education 20 years ago. We've continued to build on that. We are the organisation that offers the only education pathway to become a liquidator or a bankruptcy trustee. But we're looking into the future to make sure that that level of education, technical and professional competence is higher than ever. And that, I think, is the hallmark of a good professional body into the future. At the same time, providing that education and support that's delivered in a way that the next generation actually wants to use, because they don't want the type of education that happened 20 years ago.